All right, and our next dissection is a spiny dogfish. You can see on the front of the two dorsal fins here, and then back here. They've been cut off, so we don't cut ourselves with them, but there are two defensive hard spikes at the front of those fins. That's where the species of shark gets its name. These are an North Atlantic shark species that are really commonly caught along the beaches on the east coast of the US. We're going to flip it over and take a ventral view of this animal here. We've already opened it to save some time. One thing to note about a shark that's different from many of the other fishes is that this skin is very tough compared to other fish's skin, and they have very, very tiny pointed scales, so it's rough, almost like sandpaper. If we open this the same way we did the other animals across the ventral side of the body, we can expose the internal organs here. They don't have lungs, unlike the other two animals we're dissecting, so they're in front of the body cavity inside of the ribs, the thoracic cavity here. We have just the heart, which we'll come back to in a little bit more detail after we look at the digestive system. But the first thing to note about this digestive system is the proportions are very different from the other animals. We have a very large liver. That's what this and this right here are lobes of the liver that are connected up here. If we rotate those out of the way, you can see that they are connected at the front here to the stomach. And the stomach, that's just a straight tube coming back from the mouth, and that can stretch to fill almost the entire abdominal cavity. And if we cut that stomach open, you can see it has a much thinner membrane on the inside than, say, a mammal stomach. They don't produce as much acid, so they have nutrient absorption much more efficiently, but they make very strong digestive enzymes and can break down a meal very quickly. So this shark was harvested soon after it ate. This is the side of another fish that had just taken a bite out of. This is a large piece of a ray-finned fish. You can see the layers of abdominal muscles here and scales on the back. So that digestive tract is connected back here to only one loop. This is the only kind of convolution or bending that happens of the intestines in a shark. The back of the stomach has a small loop forward and then connects to the small intestine. The small intestine, if we open it up, it is just a straight tube, but you can see it kind of has a striated pattern. And if you open it up, those striations are actually very deep folds that provide a huge amount of surface area. It's like a series of little tiny pockets with long walls in between them. So it creates a lot of surface area where nutrient absorption can take place. And then that's connected to a short colon, or large intestine, that's connected directly to the outside through a single cloaca or vent. That is a common opening vestibule here for the reproductive tract, the excretory tract, and the digestive tract. The excretory system is connected into that vent through thin, kind of amorphous kidneys that run along the entire back of the abdomen here. They're not much to look at. They're just right against the spine. They're not a single round organ like in the mammals. But there is another organ that mammals do not have, and that the frog did not have. Right, let's see if I can open that or get light in there. This organ right here, which is connected directly into the cloaca, is a salt gland. So sharks live in the ocean where the water contains more salt than the inside of their cells. So salt is constantly leaking in as they drink water and absorb water from around them, and they have to actively pump salt out. And that is the function of this organ, is to excrete extra salt. Also connected to the cloaca is the reproductive tract, and there are two portions of that right here. that form a sort of Y shape behind that salt gland, with long tubes coming off of it that run the length of the body. And in this case, we have a female shark. And at the very front of the abdomen is an ovary. This is an immature female, so this tube has not grown large enough to pass a mature egg yet, or hold a growing pup in the lower portion of the uterine horn. But you can see inside of this ovary a small sphere here and another smaller one up here. These are growing eggs. If we resect that ovary, we can expose the egg. But this is an immature egg. If this shark had been allowed to keep growing, this egg would have grown, potentially become fertilized, and then develop into a pup inside of this uterine horn down at the base of the abdomen here. We're going to look at just two other organs before we move on to comparing that reproductive tract to some older sharks. We have a spleen, which is oriented around the base of the stomach, this thinner Y-shaped organ here. And we are going to take a closer look now at the heart. So I'm going to actually lift the heart out of this animal so that we can get a better view of it. Maybe cut the rest of that pericardium there to free the heart up. And you notice that this heart, even though this shark is maybe 2 or 3 times the size of our pig, the heart is about half the size of the pig's heart. So metabolism, again, is a little bit slower, and therefore the need for oxygen and to expel CO2 is a little bit lower in a shark, so they don't need as big of a heart. Another thing you'll notice about this heart is that there are only 2 chambers. There is a ventricle and an atrium. So this thinner walled muscle here is the atrium. The thicker, tougher muscle here is the ventricle. And there's only one blood vessel leaving that ventricle. This is the single artery leaving the ventricle, and that is the aorta. And on the other side, there is a single large blood vessel entering that atrium. And the atrium is very, very large. It extends back around either side of the ventricle, but you can see I can run the dissecting probe all the way through that. That is a single chamber. So in a fish of any type, the rayfin fishes as well as the sharks, the heart only contains 2 chambers, and their circulatory system is a single loop. So blood enters from the body, passively draining through this very large vein right here into the ventricle, into the atrium. The atrium contracts, filling this ventricle. When the ventricle contracts right after that, blood comes up into this main artery here, which you can see it actually starts to divide. There are 2 smaller arteries coming off of the underside of it right here. If we cut it a little bit farther forward, there'd be another pair, and then another, and then one more. Those feed the gills. So the blood leaving these 2 vessels here went to the back pair of gills, the most posterior pair of gills, and then the next pair of blood vessels right here, or arteries, would have gone to the next pair of gills. Blood drains from the gills and goes directly to the rest of the body, and then passively drains back to the heart. So their circulation is much slower, and they have almost no blood pressure in the body because the heart is not directly pushing blood into those vessels. So we are going to resect this heart as well and see if we can get a good view of the valves and the insides of those chambers. There's some blood left inside of it, so we'll see how clean we can get those chambers. All right, looks pretty good actually. So here you can see how large and empty the atrium is. And I had missed the center of the valve in this case. The valve is actually over on this side of the atrium. There is an opening that goes through right here into the ventricle. And there's a single atrioventricular valve there. And remember, this is a continuous opening right here in one ventricle. And when that ventricle contracts, the excurrent valve is on the other side of it here and goes straight up into our artery here and out towards the gills. So this heart has only 2 chambers and is much smaller and simpler than the ones in the tetrapods. So now we're going to come back and look, just for reference again, once more at this ovary, the very small egg that it's developing, and the very thin uterus connected to it. Again, this is an immature female shark. Another, externally, you can tell a male dogfish shark because at the medial side of these fins right here, there is actually a clasper, a finger-like projection that comes off of the inside edge of each of those. And those are used for lining up the vents for mating. And so those are present on only one sex. Now we're going to look at a slightly older female shark here. The other organs look very similar, but if we look at the reproductive organs, this ovary is much, much larger here. And we've already opened it, but there are eggs inside of it that are also much bigger. There's one egg up here, another one here, and then this is a third egg. And here's an egg from the other ovary. So these are about the size of the last joint on one of my fingers. Also, just because it's interesting, this particular shark had also just eaten right before being killed. And we have a sea robin, a bottom-dwelling fish. There's its mouth. Its eyes are right here, and here's its tail. So this is an entire fish that shark had just recently swallowed whole. Another thing we can compare that to our thin ovary and uterus there. The uterus on this shark is much, much wider. You can see that tube is much larger. And the uterine horns down at the junction here are quite a bit bigger. So this shark is closer to being reproductive age. This could hold a much larger egg or embryo in here. We can also look at one that is a little bit older than that. It has a slightly more mature reproductive tract. So again, we've already opened this one. This is a much larger individual, and you can see it has a lot of fat stored. This liver is much, much thicker, and there's a lot of oil inside of this body cavity. And you can see how large that stomach is. She could eat a very big meal. But her ovaries contained 6 eggs that were mature. This is a mature egg that was ready to be ovulated and start developing a pup. Now, if we move those eggs out of the way and expose the ovary they came from up here, is actually thinner, but quite a bit larger in size, and connected to a much, much larger and now more muscular uterus. So this is one of the uterine horns. It connects all the way down here. And you can also see now that this larger, more muscular ovary, you can see some dark discoloration here and here. Those are actually blood vessels, major blood vessels that are now supplying a lot more nutrients and energy to the uterus and the ovaries. And the other uterine horn is similarly muscular and large compared to that first one we looked at that was like a thin little string. We have one more shark that is a similar age but at a different time of the year that we will look at here as well. So this shark, here is one side of the uterus here, and a large ovary filled with various stages of more and less mature eggs. There's some medium-sized, partially developed eggs, and there's a large mature egg right up here. In the other ovary, which we resected down at the base of the uterus, you can see the inside of the uterus here. Also has kind of flexible, ridged skin inside of it. When we opened that, there was this single mature egg, and connected to it by chorionic blood vessels was this pup. So these sharks have a type of reproduction and maternal support called ovovivipary. Another name for that is aplacental live birth. A means without, so without a placenta. There's no major blood vessels feeding a placenta that connected this baby shark to the inside of the uterus. This shark is getting all of its nutrients from this really large egg here, and it was going to continue to grow until it had used up these nutrients almost completely, and that's when it would have been born. So it would have been a free-swimming, already hatched shark when it was born, but the egg at fertilization had all of the nutrients already deposited in it and wasn't supplied continuous nutrients by the mother's circulatory system. So it's kind of an in-between between laying eggs and incubating them outside the body and live birth, which in the way that mammals have it typically, with a placenta where the egg is very small and the embryo is continually supplied nutrients from the mother's blood. All right, and that is our shark.